So right here, also we need to see one important concept, which is carbon dioxide right here. You follow the arrows, eventually it's going to give you hydrogen. Okay, and when you have hydrogen, hydrogen is going to determine the pH. So basically, how do you control the pH? By controlling hydrogens. But how do you control hydrogens? By controlling carbon dioxide. And what controls carbon dioxide? The respiratory system. So the respiratory system controls the pH because the respiratory system controls the carbon dioxide, and indirectly it will control the pH because it can control the hydrogen. So that's a very important concept that you need to understand. Changes to respiration that we're going to have in our body, deeper, shallower, faster, slower, whatever, most of it is because as a consequence of the changes in pH. Because you know that you can change the pH by adjusting these hydrogens, and you can adjust these hydrogens by adjusting the carbon dioxide. So one very important stimulus to change the ventilation in our body, inhaling, exhaling, or whatever it is that we're going to do with the respiratory system, basically depends on the levels of pH, and that pH can be controlled by this hydrogen, and this hydrogen can be controlled by this carbon dioxide. So that's concept number one. The other concept that you need to understand is this is bicarbonate right here. So this bicarbonate, you get it also from the same reaction. This bicarbonate, you're going to release it from the red blood cell into the blood because you can exchange it with an antipore right here. You're going to put chlorine or chloride inside, and you remove the carbon dioxide. I'm sorry, the bicarbonate. So now you have chloride inside, no more bicarbonate because you already eliminated that. Now you have hydrogen free, basically. So this hydrogen, what it's going to do is going to attach to the hemoglobin that the red blood cell has. And when it attaches to the hemoglobin, it's going to enhance or stimulate the release of oxygen from the hemoglobin. And since you release the oxygen from the hemoglobin, that's one of the reasons why the oxygen goes from the blood into the tissues. In other words, the hydrogen attaching to hemoglobin reduces the affinity that oxygen has for hemoglobin, therefore the oxygen gets released. So let's keep scrolling down right here and let's see what else we have. Carbon dioxide loading. So we already talked about it. Why? Basically, again, same concept, from high levels of carbon dioxide to the low levels of carbon dioxide. More in the tissues than in the blood, therefore, how come the carbon dioxide gets loaded into the red blood cell, for example? Because you have more carbon dioxide in the tissues, therefore it will go from higher tissues to lower red blood cell. And that's what happens. That's why you have carbon dioxide loading. That's how it gets loading there. Now, we already talked about bicarbonate. Remember, I told you it's going to get released from the red blood cell in exchange for chloride, which is what you have in here. That's called the chloride shift. And as a consequence of that, the hydrogen will attach to the hemoglobin, therefore reducing the affinity of oxygen for the hemoglobin, therefore more oxygen can get released into the tissues. So how do we call that? Oxygen unloading. Right? How come we are able to unload the oxygen? Again, one very important concept is that the hydrogen binds to the hemoglobin, and that reduces the affinity. There you go. You see? And then that reduces, obviously, that makes this oxygen available to be released into the tissues. And again, why? Because now the red blood cell has a whole bunch of oxygen, less oxygen in the tissues. Since this is free because the hydrogen already attached to the hemoglobin, so then the oxygen can go from the red blood cell into the tissues. Okay, we already talked about that. So we keep scrolling down. Right here, well, right here it just tells you that, you know, not all the oxygen gets released, only approximately 22%, and that's called the utilization coefficient. Whatever remains in there is going to be called venous reserve. You don't need to know that. That's in extreme circumstances when you're about to die. You know, you have some reserve of oxygen in your body, but I don't think that's important for you to know. Alveolar gas exchange revisited. Okay, it's the same thing. Right, in this case, what is this? This is the capillary, and this is the lung tissue. What's the difference between lung tissue, liver tissue, kidney tissue, whatever is the same thing. So it's the same exact concept, but backwards, right? In this case, you're going to get rid of the carbon dioxide, you're going to get the oxygen into the red blood cell. But it's the same concept, higher to lower, same exact thing. You have in here the chloride, same thing. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about something that I already mentioned. So now the next topic is going to be adjustment to metabolic needs. Okay. Well, we need to talk about this because obviously the tissues have different needs of oxygen, right? Not all tissues have the same amount necessity for oxygen at the same time. So that's why there are different needs. So if one thing that I always bring to my head and when I want to understand this or remember this, so if we are exercising, then obviously you're going to have some factors that need to be changed. So then what factors modify or adjust the rate of gas exchange depending on what the body needs? Then you have the environment, right? Ambient PO, which is the pressure of oxygen in the environment, and the amount of oxygen that you have in your tissues. Since the tissues are constantly using the oxygen, then obviously you have less oxygen in your tissues, more oxygen on the environment. Therefore, the oxygen will go from the environment, basically from the outside into your tissues. That's what this one is. Temperature. If we are, let's say, exercising, the temperature increases. So if you are exercising, your tissues need, you are getting hot, therefore the temperature increases, and your body needs more oxygen because you're exercising. So then temperature is going to be a factor that is going to make the hemoglobin release oxygen because your tissues are going to need more oxygen. Again, if you think about exercising, that's one of the things. It's not necessarily accurate, but you can use it as a reference if you want to remember this. So if you scroll down right here, this is something that you're going to see in all the books. This is hemoglobin dissociation. Right here, let's take a look at 60. Okay, so let's say with the pressure of oxygen is 60. If we go up right here, this one right here in blue is normal temperature. Let's say this is 100%. Okay, let's say this is the blue is 100%. If the temperature increases, as you can see here, the red line, then if the blue one is 100%, you know that this is not 100. Let's say this is 90. So where is the other 10%? That's the 10% that went into the tissues because the temperature stimulates the release of oxygen so the tissues can get more oxygen from the hemoglobin. Okay, so that's what that shows you. So we keep scrolling down. Another thing is pH. Same concept. Low pH, right here, is going to make you release more oxygen into the tissues. Okay, it's the same exact concept. And remember, if you are exercising, you're producing more carbon dioxide. If you produce carbon dioxide, you produce more hydrogen. And if you produce more hydrogen, the pH goes down because your body is becoming acidic. And if the pH goes down because it's becoming acidic, because you are exercising, then obviously you need more oxygen. Therefore, a lower pH will stimulate the release of oxygen into the tissues. That's what you got right here. So if we scroll down, the Bohr effect, that's what I just mentioned. Carbon dioxide controls hydrogen. Hydrogen determines pH. So if you lower the pH, then you will need more oxygen. Why? Because the only way you can lower the pH is if you have more carbon dioxide. So then if you have more carbon dioxide, more hydrogen, lower pH. Therefore, your body knows that it needs to produce more, it needs to release more oxygen to that particular area. And also remember that more hydrogen will attach more to hemoglobin. Therefore, oxygen will be freely to go into the tissues. That's what this is, and this is actually called the Bohr effect. Next one that we have is BPG. BPG is an intermediary metabolite of anaerobic respiration. Remember, red blood cells don't have mitochondria, therefore we can only produce ATP using anaerobic respiration, and that is going to produce BPG, which is biphosphoglycerate. Okay, when you have biphosphoglycerate, same thing like with the hydrogen, it stimulates the unloading of oxygen into the tissues. Okay, that's what you need to remember. Okay, so we keep scrolling down. Okay, then we have in here the rate of Haldane effect. Haldane effect got to do with the hemoglobin, and it says that if you have free hemoglobin, then there's more opportunity for the carbon dioxide to attach to it, so the carbon dioxide can be transported. Okay, so then that's what basically Haldane effect is. Okay, and let's keep scrolling down. Right here we have blood gases and respiratory rhythm. So how do we adjust the respiratory rhythm? As faster, slower, or whatever it is, because hydrogens, remember I already showed you that, hydrogens will change the pH, and because of change of pH, that's one very important factor that is going to make you change the levels of or the way we are going to breathe. And I already mentioned that. You see here, you see again, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, pH, same thing that we already talked about. It obviously changes in pH are going to give you acidosis and alkalosis. And remember, these changes in pH depends on the levels of carbon dioxide. So low levels of carbon dioxide, hypocapnia, high levels of carbon dioxide, hypercapnia. So if you keep scrolling down, so this is the chemical reaction that we already talked about it. Carbon dioxide plus water, carbonic acid, bicarbonate, hydrogen. So besides the hydrogen, obviously, what else affects the ventilation? Carbon dioxide, right? Obviously, because carbon dioxide is going to have an effect in pH, not directly, but indirectly, because it can control the hydrogens, right? And so, well, there you go. You have carbon dioxide. Again, it's not directly changes, but rather by changing the pH. We already talked about that. Oxygen is 90% saturated. I mean, hemoglobin is 97% saturated with oxygen. Oxygen has basically no change or no effects on the changes in ventilation that we're going to have in our body, unless that there's some extreme circumstance, like it says in here, very high altitudes where the partial pressure or the pressure of oxygen changes, but that's not something that we're going to be talking about in here. Next one is respiration and exercise. This is just to clarify, probably, let me see. Yeah, you see, this is to clarify that the changes in ventilation when you exercise is not because you actually produce more carbon dioxide or temperature, as I was telling you before, for educational purposes, but rather that the brain tells your muscles, okay, we are ready to exercise. So not only tells your muscles to start working faster, but also it's going to tell directly your respiratory system to start breathing faster, to adjust the levels of oxygen to the metabolic needs that your muscles are going to have. So then it's not necessarily that, the increasing levels of carbon dioxide like we were talking about, but this is only specific to exercise. So in exercise, it's basically the brain tells the muscles you need to work faster because we are going to exercise, but it tells at the same time the respiratory centers to breathe faster in order to adjust to the metabolic needs that the muscles are going to have at that time. Okay, and that's seen because the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide and pH don't change when we exercise. So let's see here, you have a summary that we already talked about that. I mean, pulmonary ventilation basically changes according to the levels of hydrogen because it's going to change the pH. pH is controlled in your central nervous system as well as in your peripheral, in your blood vessels, right, with the different types of receptors that we have in there. And these chemoreceptors are the ones that are going to send information to the dorsal respiratory group to modify ventilation. So then why do we modify it? In order to maintain a pH 740 and about 40 of carbon dioxide, because this was going to make sure that at least 97% of the hemoglobin gets saturated with oxygen, which is necessary for our survival. Okay, then let's keep scrolling down. That's it. The next chapter is diseases. I'm not going to talk about that because that's not part of this course.